Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, realizing that the thing you've been working on for 15 years doesn't even exist. Panic, right? Pinch yourself to make sure you're not dreaming. Well, this happened to me. See, this whole time, my only claim to fame was getting introduced at events as a space industry expert. And now I know that the space industry, it isn't even a thing. Let me explain. My passion and focus for my whole life has been the space industry. I wanted to be an astronaut as a kid. I went to school, studied aerospace engineering. I worked on space industry projects and space industry companies. Now, 15 years ago, if you told someone you worked in the space industry, it was pretty easy to know what you were talking about. There wasn't that much going on. It was three things. You were either building satellites, launching rockets, or working for NASA. That's it. So for me, I landed the job at Boeing, building commercial communication satellites. But after a few years, the space industry started to change. A billionaire named Dennis Tito paid $20 million for his own private trip to the space station. Scale Composites, a company in the Mojave Desert, built Spaceship One and became the first non-government funded team to build a vehicle capable of taking a person into space. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and others got started in what became a new wave of commercial space activity. Now, about this time, I had a hunch that the space industry was going to need more people who understood how to build and operate businesses. So I left my engineering career behind and went off to business school to get an MBA. I told the admission folks that I wanted to be an astropreneur. And while I was in business school, I saw more and more companies getting started in space and also started to see investors who wanted to put money into space companies. They had a real hard time finding each other, though, so I started a company called Space Angels, whose job was to help investors find the best startups in the space industry. And since then, since about 2006, there have been 200 space startups that have raised money from outside investors. Now, that's a lot of companies in a short period of time. So what drove that growth? There were primarily two things that caused this new wave of commercial space growth. First is that the cost of getting stuff into space came down. It still was really expensive, but it started to come down a little bit, started heading in the right direction. But second, there was a revolution in satellite technology. See, back in the NASA era of space exploration, everything that went into space was big, really expensive, because it had to be super reliable. You know, there's a saying, you've probably heard it, failure is not an option, right? Well, those of us who actually build spacecraft have a different saying. It's when failure is not an option, success gets really expensive. And this bore itself out throughout the whole space industry. Everything going into space was big and expensive. This is what satellites looked like. They're the size of school buses. This one had a mass of 5,000 kilograms. It cost $500 million to design and build, and then another $70 million to launch into space on its own dedicated rocket. Now, with numbers like that and that many dollar signs, it's hard for entrepreneurs really to do anything. So the space industry was just governments and really big companies. But here's what happened. Entrepreneurs, some funded by space angels, looked at this. But they didn't see a phone. They saw a satellite. Now think about it. This smartphone has everything you need in a satellite. It's got a computer, it's got data storage, it's got batteries, communication system, it can send radio signals, sensors like cameras. It even has accelerometers and knows exactly which direction it's pointing in. Like it practically is a satellite. So people started thinking about this differently. Some people even sent cell phones into space. And we started taking advantage of these new commercial electronics and building satellites in a different way. And now, today, satellites look more like this. They weigh just a couple of kilograms, cost less than $100,000 to build, and only $200,000 to launch into space because you could fit dozens, if not hundreds of them on the same rocket. So I had a front row seat for this satellite technology revolution. I got to see, firsthand what these two different types of satellites look like. But think about it. The cost of a spacecraft went down by 10,000 times. It's truly a revolution. And it unleashed a wave of entrepreneurship in the space industry that has kept going. Space Angels has invested in dozens of space companies taking advantage of this technology. And I have the privilege of working for one of them today. It's called Planetary Resources. And our vision is to create the capability to mine asteroids for valuable resources. So this sounds great, right? So my passion, my work are aligned completely, getting to work in the space industry, doing what I love. The industry is doing well and growing. Everything's very exciting, living the dream. Not so fast, though. I was talking to a friend recently about the types of companies that Space Angels invests in, and she asked me a question. And the question was, how do you know if a company is a space company? So it seems like a simple question, right? But let me tell you, this is the type of question that wakes you up in the middle of the night and makes you question everything you're doing. I had to rethink everything because there wasn't an easy answer. There's so many different types of companies doing different things in space. It's hard to find something that ties them all together. And that made me realize two things. First, I'm not a space industry expert. And second, it's because space isn't an industry. Space is a place, not an industry. Of course, right? I mean, space is just a place you can do stuff. It's a place to do business. So I thought, well, maybe that's okay that space isn't an industry, because new industries actually are created all the time. But how often is it that we find a new place to do things? Finding new places to do business is actually significant turning points in history and civilization. Let's go back to the age of discovery. North America, right? As ties between Europe and North America grew, trade increased, and new business opportunities arose. But those business opportunities weren't the North America industry. That's silly, right? They were in existing industries like logging and farming and shipbuilding and shoemaking. Industries that already existed, not in North America. North America was the platform for growth for these new companies. Something happened more recently where we found a new place to do business. You can consider the internet a new place to do business, right? Here's some internet companies. Amazon. Is Amazon in the internet industry? Not really. It's in the e-commerce and cloud computing industry. Expedia, Airbnb, not in the internet industry. They're in the travel industry. What about Uber? Uber would never have existed if it weren't for the internet, but not an internet company. It's a transportation company, right? You get it. North America, the internet, space, they're all places to do business. Companies use these places as a platform. And just like that, space is just a place. It's a place to do business. And even a lot of people who work at space companies like me still consider space to be its own standalone industry. But I think that as space companies get bigger and more successful, space starts looking less like its own industry and more like its own economy. Because places don't have industries, they have economies. And the space economy is poised for significant growth. But you don't have to take my word for it. There's already two people you know well that are having an outside impact on the growth of the space economy. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Both are channeling billions of dollars of their own money and other people's money into the space economy. And both share a similar vision of the future of what that space economy will look like. It's a simple vision. Millions of people living and working in space. Millions of people living and working in space. Now, Bezos and Musk don't agree on all the finer details, like where those people are, what they're doing, how they got there, but pretty much everyone in the space economy today agrees with this vision and is working to make it happen. So what will that look like, millions of people living and working in space? There's about 3.7 million people living and working in the Seattle metropolitan area. Think about all the people and processes and systems that it takes to keep an operation like that running. Right now, today, there are 6 people living and working in space. 6. It's the crew of the International Space Station. So I admit we've got some work ahead of us. But what's going to cause the space economy to grow from 6 people to 60 to 600 to 6,000 to 6 million? It's going to be companies in the same industries that power our Earth economy today. Just add the line, looking to do business in space. It'll be energy companies looking to do business in space. Transportation companies looking to do business in space. Hospitality, transportation, extraction, information, construction, mining companies looking to do business in space. All looking up for the next growth opportunity. Let's take energy. Energy is the largest industry on Earth, over $8 trillion in revenue annually, and growing every year. Humans are prolific energy consumers, and that won't change in space. Even a population of a few thousand people living and working in space will require an enormous amount of energy. Now, some of that energy can come from the sun using solar power. But in order to move people and things around in space, you need to use chemical rockets. And rockets need fuel. In order to get that fuel, we're going to have to source it on Earth, load it into rockets, and launch it into space at over $10,000 per kilogram. So that need for energy isn't going to be satisfied, and it's going to be a significant hurdle for the growth of the space economy. But there's a better way to get the resources to fuel the space economy, by mining them from space. All the valuable resources on Earth are valuable in nearly limitless quantities in space, on asteroids, and the moon, and other celestial bodies. Goldman Sachs, earlier this year, released a report that said asteroid mining was more realistic than perceived, with costs comparable to traditional Earth mines. The government of Luxembourg believes so strongly in the future of space mining that they've invested $227 million into their Space Resources Initiative to make Luxembourg the center of the space mining industry. And it's working. Multiple companies, both new and existing, have moved to Luxembourg and set up shop there, including Planetary Resources, making Luxembourg one of the premier places on Earth to do business in space. Now, asteroid mining is not about going out and finding platinum and gold and precious metals and bringing it back to Earth. That's not what it's about. It's about living off the land. And our vision, and the vision for space mining, is about finding resources in space to use in space, to fuel that space economy. It's a way to get resources so that we don't have to rely on stuff on Earth being launched into space at great cost. We can find what we need, that's stuff that's already outside the gravity of Earth. And that's why the first thing we'll mine, and the most valuable resource in space, is water. H2O. You can take water and break it down into hydrogen and oxygen. And then you've got rocket fuel. Hydrogen and oxygen was used to launch all the space shuttle missions. It's the most chemically efficient rocket fuel. And once we have a source of fuel outside of Earth's gravity, in space, the space economy can grow really rapidly. We can move things and goods around in space with relative ease and at low cost. We'll build stuff in space. We'll start building infrastructure in space. The construction industry actually rivals the energy industry for the largest on Earth, and that rivalry will continue in space. But at first, in order to build stuff in space, we'll have to get stuff on Earth, launch it up into space, until or unless we can find a source of building materials in space. Well, asteroids come to the rescue again. What's next is we'll send 3D printers to metallic asteroids and start printing out space stations. Sounds far-fetched, right? Well, what if I told you that Planetary Resources has already proven in a lab that you can take a metallic meteorite, grind it up, put it into a commercial 3D printer, and print out structural components? Already been done. So as you can see, our preconception about our economy, it can't be limited to just what we can do and dig up from here on Earth. It's got to include the whole solar system, and it will. So think about how your life will change when that happens. I believe that the lives of everyone in this room, really everyone on the planet, will be affected, for the better, by our global infrastructure and economy expanding into space. Remember the vision. Millions of people living and working in space. Millions. We'll build self-contained societies. So far, as of today, only 536 people have ever been to space. Everyone else, in the whole history of humanity, has lived their entire lives with their feet firmly planted here on Earth. Now, I think that soon our children or grandchildren will live in a time when an entire human lifetime can be lived without ever setting foot on this one planet we call home. And I think that's a good thing. People are affected positively by going to new places, right? Think about travel. You remember the first time you traveled to a foreign country, it changes your perspective a little bit. 150 years ago, when space travel was still just science fiction, Mark Twain talked about travel in a way that I think is relevant to this. Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." Now, I completely agree with Twain on this. Next to space, my other passion is international travel, and my wife and I are really proud to have been able to travel together to 49 countries. And every time we go to a new place, it changes our perspective a little bit. It gives us a little greater appreciation for what's different and what's the same. Now, space, it's the ultimate place to travel to. And something really special happens when people go to space and are able to see the Earth from afar for the first time. Psychologists even have a term for it. It's called the overview effect. And it's what astronauts describe when they go into space for the first time and see the Earth in its entirety. They have an epiphany, a rush of emotions, seeing this small planet in the vast darkness of space. Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, he was the 6th person to walk on the moon. He said something that I hope is true, and that gives me great hope for what the space economy and space can do for all of us. Mitchell said about looking at the Earth from space, "You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it." Now, I look forward to living in a world where millions of people have been to that place. Thank you.